The late-night shift dragged on at the quiet diner. The hum of a flickering neon sign outside barely broke the silence. Olivia Brooks wiped down the counter, exhausted but relieved that the night was almost over. Then the bell above the door jingled. She glanced up, expecting another weary traveler or a local looking for coffee. Instead, a sharply dressed man stepped in. His presence was commanding. His suit alone probably cost more than her entire year's rent. He moved with quiet confidence, scanning the diner like someone used to owning every room he entered. Olivia watched as he settled into a booth by the window, his piercing gaze locked on the city streets. When she walked over to take his order, he didn't bother looking at the menu. "Black coffee," he said, his voice low and firm. She nodded, jotting it down. When she returned a few minutes later with his drink, he barely acknowledged her. Olivia was used to the indifference of customers, so she didn't take it personally. But when he reached for his wallet to pay, something slipped out. A photograph. It fluttered to the floor, face up. Olivia's heart stopped. She knew that face. The warm, gentle smile. The kind eyes. Her mother. For a moment, all she could do was stare, her pulse pounding in her ears. Then, before she could stop herself, she bent down and picked it up. "Where did you get this?" Her voice was barely a whisper. The man's head snapped up, his cool blue eyes locking onto hers. For the first time, he truly saw her. Olivia turned the photograph toward him, gripping it tightly. "Why do you have a picture of my mother?" His expression flickered, just for a second. Then, just as quickly, his face became unreadable again. Without a word, he reached for the photograph, his fingers brushing against hers as he took it. "You must be mistaken," he said, tucking it back into his wallet as if it meant nothing. Olivia's stomach twisted. She knew exactly what she had seen. Her mother had kept a near-identical photograph in a memory box back home. She had memorized every crease, every detail. This wasn't a mistake. "I'm not mistaken," she said firmly. "Why do you have it?" The man exhaled sharply, adjusting the cuff of his expensive suit. "I don't owe you an explanation." Then, before she could react, he stood, placed a crisp $100 bill on the counter, and walked toward the door. Panic surged through her. He was leaving. This might be her only chance. She rushed out from behind the counter, nearly knocking over a tray in her haste. Wait. He didn't stop. He was already heading toward a sleek black car parked at the curb. The driver stepped out to open the door. "Please, just tell me how you knew her." For a brief moment, he paused, his hand resting on the car door. She thought, hoped, he might say something. Instead, he turned just enough to meet her gaze. His stare was cool, detached. Then, in a voice devoid of emotion, he said, "Forget this." He slid into the car. The door shut behind him. The engine roared to life, and the vehicle disappeared into the night. Olivia stood frozen on the sidewalk, her breath coming in uneven bursts. A billionaire had just walked into her life and left her with more questions than she could count. Who was he? And why did he have a photograph of her mother? She wasn't letting this go. That night, Olivia sat at her tiny kitchen table, her laptop open, searching for any clue about the man from the diner. No name. No business card. No receipt with a name. Just his face, his voice, and the dismissive way he looked at her. But that photograph changed everything. She started searching for wealthy business tycoons, real estate moguls, and influential CEOs. Dozens of names flooded her screen, but none matched his face. Her frustration grew. Hours passed. Then, just as she was about to give up, she saw him. Graham Whitaker, CEO of Whitaker Holdings. A billionaire real estate magnate. A man whose empire spanned cities, his name tied to luxury developments and high-profile deals. Olivia clicked on his image. Her breath hitched. It was him. She scrolled through article after article, but nothing linked him to her mother. No past relationships. No known family ties. Nothing. Which meant only one thing. He had erased her. Olivia clenched her fists. He had walked into that diner holding a picture of her mother and acted as if she didn't exist. As if Naomi Brooks had meant nothing. She wasn't letting this go. The next morning, Olivia boarded the first bus downtown. Her heart pounded as she stepped off in front of a massive glass skyscraper, Whitaker Holdings. The building loomed over her, a symbol of wealth and power. But she wasn't intimidated. She walked inside, straight to the reception desk. "I need to see Graham Whitaker," she said, her voice steady. The receptionist barely looked up. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Olivia admitted. "But it's important." The woman sighed, unimpressed. "Mr. Whitaker doesn't take walk-in meetings." Olivia expected this. No appointment. No official reason to be here. If she wanted answers, She'd have to find another way. Her eyes darted around the lobby. Security guards near the elevators. Employees flashing badges to get through the turnstiles. No way she was getting in the normal way. Then she spotted him, a young man in his mid-20s, balancing a coffee cup and a folder, heading toward the elevators. He looked distracted. She moved quickly, falling into step beside him. "Hey," she whispered urgently. "Wait up. You forgot to send me that report Mr. Whitaker needed." The man blinked, startled. "What?" Olivia sighed in fake exasperation. "The report. He was expecting it this morning." Before he could respond, she smoothly stepped forward, walking through the turnstile just as his badge activated the sensor. The guard barely glanced at her. She was in. Her pulse pounded as she stepped into the elevator, pressing the button for the top floor. This was it. The elevator doors slid open to the top floor of Whitaker Holdings. Olivia stepped out, her breath shallow, hands clenched at her sides. The reception area was sleek, modern, and intimidating. A man in a dark suit approached her instantly. "Miss, do you have an appointment?" "No," she said. "But I need to see Graham Whitaker. It's about my mother." The man's jaw tightened. "Mr. Whitaker doesn't take walk-ins. Tell him my mother's name was Naomi Brooks, and I'm not leaving until I speak to him." The man hesitated, then disappeared down a hallway. The minutes stretched endlessly. Then finally, a door opened. Graham Whitaker stepped out. The moment he saw her, something flickered in his gaze. Not surprise. Not anger. Something closer to resignation. He walked toward her, slow and deliberate. Then, after a long pause, he simply said, "Come with me." Olivia followed him into his office, her heart racing. The moment the door closed, she turned to face him. "Why do you have a picture of my mother?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his desk, pulled out his wallet, and placed the photograph on the table. Olivia stared at it, then slowly lifted her gaze to his. "You knew her," she whispered. Graham met her eyes, his expression unreadable. "I didn't just know her," he said finally. "I loved her." Olivia took a step back, the weight of his words crashing over her. Her breath caught. The world tilted. "She never mentioned you," Olivia said, her voice shaking. Graham nodded slowly. "Because I hurt her. I walked away. My family, they wouldn't accept her. Wouldn't accept our love. I was weak, Olivia. I chose wealth over what mattered." Her eyes brimmed with tears. "She raised me alone. She never once complained. She worked double shifts at that diner so I could finish school, while you lived in penthouses." "I know," he whispered. "And I regret it every single day." Silence stretched between them. "Why the photo?" she asked finally. "Why carry it all these years?" "Because letting go of her wasn't the same as forgetting her. I never stopped loving her, even after she vanished from my life. That photo, it was all I had." Olivia blinked rapidly. Her throat ached. "You left her," she said. "And you didn't know she was pregnant, did you?" Graham stared at her. His silence was confirmation. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet pouch. From it, she drew a necklace with a delicate pendant. She placed it on his desk. "She left this for me. Said it belonged to my father. There's a note, in her handwriting. Forgive. Love. Begin." Graham touched the pendant gently. Emotion rippled across his face. "She never told me. I never knew I had a daughter." Olivia crossed her arms. "I didn't come here to build a family. I came here for the truth." He nodded. "You deserve that." "And what now?" she asked. He looked at her, his voice low and full of restraint. "Now. It's your choice. I won't push. But if you ever want to know who I am outside of a boardroom, if you ever want to know what could be, I'm here." She hesitated. Then she reached for the necklace and clasped it around her neck. Her fingers trembled. "I'm not ready to forgive," she said softly. "But maybe. I'm ready to start something." A faint smile touched his lips. "That's more than I could hope for." She turned and walked to the door. This time, she wasn't storming out. She wasn't fleeing. She walked away slowly, steady. Her story wasn't ending. It was just beginning. And maybe, just maybe, so was his.